Hey, welcome everybody to Spin Legal. It is the 23rd of September today, and yesterday was actually yesterday was actually
Yesterday
was it's the start of autumn today.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So welcome everybody, episode 84 with Angela and myself. And so if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598 or email Angela at weareinvictus.legal, or you can contact me on the email Peter at weareinvictus.legal, and our website is weareinvictus.legal. So there you go. And today we're going to discuss the topic of what tenants' rights existing with disability access. I can't even say the word properly. Bad day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there we go. Disability access and tenants' rights. There we go. Okay, so there's a number of acts of law that would apply here. Obviously, the Residential Tenancies Act, because we're dealing with tenancies, and anything to deal with residential tenancies, whether whatever it is, including disability, is included.
Somebody it's not good enough just to tell your landlord that you're on ODSP.
Yeah.
And then come up and throw a tenant claim at them that they failed to abide by your disability rights.
Yeah.
They have to know a little bit more about your disability.
Well, in fact,
how you could accommodate them as a landlord. See, this is this thing that I always have difficulties seeing. People are on ODSP for all sorts of reasons.
Well, I was going to say some ODSP people are, let's call them walking wounded. They have no issue. They have no issue getting around. They can do most things, except they are, it takes them longer to do most things than, normal people. Normal people are not things
undisabled or non-disabled people.
Yeah. But the Residential Tenancies Act applies with a lot of cases. And of course, what also might apply in terms of certain types of housing might well be the Housing Services Act as well.
Yeah, if you're in a subsidized housing with your region, right, and housing under subsidized housing with your respective regions program is governed by the Housing Services Act.
Yeah.
And there's issues under the Housing Services Act that sometimes may impinge on disability. And sometimes these housing units are directed at people with specific types of disabilities. For example, mental health supportive housing units.
Yeah. And there are certain organizations that have housing under these schemes, don't they?
Yeah. Sometimes these organizations, like say the Canadian Mental Health Association, may rent out units in different neighborhoods, in non-disabled buildings or just regular buildings where other people live, but they have a few units in each of them, and they devote these buildings to their clients.
Yeah. Okay. Another part of law that applies is the Ontario Human Rights Code, because if they fail to provide, to accommodate, then, and we'll talk much more about accommodation later on, then you may have a case that relates that is brought against the Human Rights Code of Ontario.
Yeah.
Right. One thing we talked about at the beginning of this year was also the Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. That's a mouthful of an act.
This is constantly building standards. In Ontario, we have standards for everything.
Yeah.
Employment, transportation, education, housing, building code standards. So these things are constantly being reviewed and looked at. Unfortunately, when this thing was passed, when it was originally passed, it was set up to say, okay, we're going to make Ontario accessible by 2025. Okay, guess what, guys? It is 2025. Is Ontario accessible yet?
No.
Right.
I mean, there's
The series
plenty
of
of buildings.
governments that failed to take steps to make Ontario accessible.
Yeah,
When you're looking at barrier-free access, this is not just for people with physical disabilities who use wheelchairs, but for all sorts of things.
yeah.
There's all sorts of areas where people could have barriers. And this was something that was raised again and again. And I've had my opportunity to work with the Ontario Accessibilities for Ontarians Act, where I've been serving on subcommittees. And I've worked with them, particularly around employment. And I gave substantial input into the transportation standards.
Well, the one good thing about this, though, is that hey, if I'm a developer and I'm putting up a new 15-floor apartment building, down a mile down over there, it'll have to have lifts, won't it?
Yep, absolutely. I think there have to be lifts for anything that's over a certain number of stories. I think over 3 stories. Yeah, because we've had our co-op. We've had in the original co-op that was set up was 3 stories, and I lived on the 3rd floor. There was no elevator.
Yeah.
So imagine hauling all your groceries up the stairs, your bike up the stairs.
Well, I think it's bad enough with 3 floors.
Yeah, and then across the street they built a 4-story building, and yes, it had a lift.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a bunch of rules on things like that, and of course they're also guided by, of course, the Building Code Act for new buildings.
Yeah.
The Building Code Act applies less, of course, to older buildings unless there's significant renovations being made to an older building.
Yep, we've had to go through. I've had several human rights cases that dealt with human rights code, where tenants had disabilities, and we'll get into those later.
Well, I'm thinking, for example, just to give an example. So I own my own house, and on the ground floor, the potential is there that on the ground floor itself, the actual floor is relatively flat, and so long as you could get wheelchair, providing the doors are the right width, and I haven't a clue whether they are, right? You could get wheelchair access to most of the ground floor of the house. You might have difficulties going up the stairs. You might have difficulty getting to the basement. But one big difficulty you would have would be getting into the ground floor, because we're 4 steps up from the street.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you might have to have a ramp. You'd have to build, and it doesn't have to be concrete, but you might build a concrete or wooden ramp or something, or metal ramp or something of that nature.
Yeah. And ramps could easily be built, and there are people that can help you know how to build a ramp and how steep it has to be and so forth. And they can make it workable. Or there's stair lifts. If the place is not applicable for a ramp, you can put it up a stair lift.
Well, there's a ramp. There's a chairlift as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
That you can get, that will go from the up to the 4, up to 4 steps. You wouldn't need more than a chairlift.
Yeah, and I've seen them before being built, and they're relatively inexpensive.
Yep.
And these are things that are done. And then now we're watching some things where people are building elevators in their own houses, which is weird.
Actually, that would be a nice thing that I'd like. I'd like one up to the attic room if I could do the job. The trouble is, it's too expensive.
Yeah, it'd be expensive now, but as they get purchased and so forth, and then they become less expensive as people buy them.
Oh yeah, but you can get a lot of more new technology today that would certainly mean that for example, the potential there is that you can have an elevator that means I could get up to the attic. I could be on the 1st floor. I could be on the ground floor. I could be on the basement, all through a wheelchair.
Yep.
Right.
And there are places that have been retrofitted that way. I mean, it's not cheap, but it could be done.
Oh yeah, you probably wouldn't get much change out of $100,000 today, but hey, that's the sort of thing that could be done. And again, when we'll be looking at some of the questions that there might well be differences between what will happen to a single family home, like what I was just describing there, and what you might do to modify it for a wheelchair. And that the same would be true whether you're renting it or owning it as a disabled person. And so there might well be some accommodations that will need to be looked at. And
there's a lot of things, and we have to start looking at disability from a very broad range angle. That mental, physical, neurological, cognitive, every type of disability there is, in terms of accommodation. Like there are different disabilities that may not necessarily need to be accommodated in your building.
Well, and exactly. And
there's other disabilities that might have to be, and it really depends on the person, not necessarily the disability, but the person with the disability.
Well, for example, with some disabilities, it might take a person a little while to go up and down the stairs, but they'd prefer to go up and down stairs, for example.
Exactly.
And I had in fact, actually, my wife's aunt used to basically sit at the top of the stairs and just, come down one step at a time. She'd sit, and then when she's going up, she'd sit on the stair and then go up one step at a time. She used to have a laugh about it. She was in good humor.
See, when I was young, I used to jump down the stairs. Jump down the stairs, each flight, jump down the stairs. And then when I'm going up, I used to take 2 steps at a time. I used to have that type of energy.
And your mom and dad would say, "Don't do that, Angela."
Yeah. They just said, "Oh, you're going to fall down on your ass." Never happened.
All right. Okay, so let's move on. The Ontario Human Rights Code ensures that all tenants are protected from discrimination based upon disability. So the worst happens, you suffer an injury, and now you've got to tell your landlord, "Hey, this has happened. I need an accommodation." All right. So it's clear that a lot of our laws are actually based upon protection from discrimination based upon needs, changing needs. Right.
Exactly.
So,
and it's the same as older people, who want to age in place. Hey, like, have you really thought about it? Like, especially even those who own their own home, but who do not want to go to a nursing home, but as they get older, they might still have their wits about them, but their physical needs may have some issues. Okay, how's your house? Can you get in and out of it without having a problem? Can you get around different rooms? Hey, how about rugs?
Valid questions.
Anti-slip issues. There's a lot of different things that you might have to look through your house to make sure you're protected.
That's why I want the lift, Angela. Nice dream, eh?
Yeah, dream on, Peter.
Yeah, dream on, yeah.
It isn't going to happen.
Okay. So when it comes down to the law in relation to tenants' rights, housing providers must accommodate the needs of tenants with disabilities to the point of undue hardship. And we will talk about undue hardship. We'll have a section about that. But it's important that it's the accommodation that matters, right? So the AODA, that is the Ontario Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and the Building Code set minimum standards for physical accessibility. And that's an important thing because those standards have changed over time, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. It's almost an evolving standard. And as each time goes, I was one of the first among them to go into the AODA standards development committees. And I really enjoyed that. That was good work.
Okay.
And we put a lot of stuff together. We learned a lot. But unfortunately, what happens when you're doing these things, it becomes an evolving sense of duty.
Yeah.
Because what we accomplished, then the next group of people come in and say, "Is that all these people do? Let's do this," so they have to add something on top of that. And these AODA standards are set, although they're legal set, and they give standards and people have to follow them. You're a new builder, you're building a building, it has to follow the AODA standards, that sort of thing, But if you're an old building, as it's set, it doesn't necessarily mean that they could force you to tear everything down and fix it up. However,
Yeah.
one of the issues that you have to be careful of, if you have a person in there, like I had a couple of cases in the human rights. One of them was where a person was in a building, it was a 10-story building, and it was all a rental type of building. And she couldn't open the door on her own. She used a
Yeah.
wheelchair, okay, and she had an ability to get around. She was fairly independent. She can get around her own unit, and she can get around. The whole thing, when people were writing back to me, says, "Oh, maybe she needs to be in a care home."
Mm.
Tell that to this person, she'll whack you across your face 3 times, right?
Yeah.
But she was independent. She knew what she wanted. She knew what she needed.
Yeah.
And she says, all I need is an electric door opener.
Yeah.
Because she relied on calling people to have them come down and open the door for her. Now, what kind of dignity issue was that?
Yeah.
So I said,
Absolutely. An electric door opener, and an electric door opener is probably, in an apartment building might well be, $500 to $1,000 worth of, and plus the
yeah,
fobs that you need to
depending
give
on
out to
the,
people, right?
depending on the, well, it was actually more than that, but still, it's was not necessarily hugely expensive as they were
No,
anticipating.
yeah, but not hugely expensive, and
Yeah, I went out and got a quote for them, and I gave it to them,
yeah,
to let them know how much it costs for someone to do the electrical work and put it in.
yeah,
But anyways, at the end of the day, we ended up at the Human Rights Code at the hearing, and we met with somebody, a set of lawyers who representing them, who actually started representing them, who actually knew something about the Human Rights Code. So we actually sorted it out and settled it. So they got the electric door opener and they compensated my client.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the thing is about electric door opener, it isn't just that one tenant. It could be the 150 tenants that are in the same building, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. Because I said it's going to happen again,
Yeah.
Until this building is. And this was an older building. The
Yeah.
argument the original legal representative gave me, oh, they're retrofit, they're exempt. All
They're
this,
not.
and I said, they're not exempt. So what
Yeah.
I did is I picked up a bunch of case law and I threw it at him. I said, read the case law, review
Well,
it with your client, and then tell me whether they're exempt or not.
and again, what you've just been talking about there is an accommodation. So
Yeah.
an accommodation can include physical changes, ramps, accessible doors, adjustments in policies, allowing service animals, adapted communications, flexible procedures. It can also mean private changes to private living spaces, changes to common areas such as like the hallways in an apartment building, elevators, laundry rooms, outdoor access, etc. So
It could
can
even
you?
involve the trading units. For
Yeah,
example, we would not trade units at the co-op because it was very, oh, well, we can't do that, trade units. This person was on the 3rd floor. Her needs changed. She couldn't
mm,
use the stairs. She couldn't do anything. So we got her onto the 1st floor eventually after I started
yeah.
picking a fight with the co-op. So,
So, and of course, the law states that the landlords must seriously consider all reasonable accommodation requests, unless meeting them would cause undue hardship to the landlord.
yeah,
And we will get to there. I promise that we will talk about
yeah,
undue
we'll talk
hardship.
about undue hardship that's set in the code.
Yeah. Okay. So service dogs.
Service dogs. Now, this is an interesting one because now under the AODA, it's not just for people who are blind. It's for any type of disability. Like I have a special needs cat. Okay, it curls up on my lap, and every time I'm feeling kind of off, the cat jumps on my lap. Okay, so just put a harness on her, and she's a service cat.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
Right?
talking cat. You're talking cat here. Come on. We all know that cats will do what they wish,
Yeah,
not what you tell
yeah.
them to do.
But service dogs, they could be trained for various things, for mental health issues like
Yeah.
PTSD or anxiety, or they can deal with blind, and to some extent they could be hearing ear to help people who are deaf.
Well,
Also for people who take seizures, So they have a full range of purposes, and
Actually,
they
the
get specially trained through the Lions Club.
Yeah, the interesting one that I heard about was actually the one, the service dog that was trained for seizures.
Yep.
This dog could 90% of the time when the person it's caring for has a seizure, it can do certain things. It's trained to be able to do certain things that would in fact actually get you out of the seizure.
Mm-hmm.
But on those other occasions when you don't come out of the seizure, it's also trained to be able to set the alarm off by pressing the big red button on a particular thing.
Yeah, the dogs can save your life.
Yeah, yeah. It's very interesting about service dogs and puts a whole different perspective, because remember, a service dog is not a pet.
Yeah, people have had. There's been cases about service dogs. There was one recent one in Ontario where somebody was harassed, and because she had a service dog all of a sudden, and they because her needs changed while she was still living there, and she had a service dog, and they didn't believe that this was a service dog. They thought this was just a regular dog, and she ended up taking this to human rights. And not only did she get it approved through her landlord, she also got it approved through ODSP, which funds only guide dogs. But this was not a service dog for her being blind. I think it was a seizure dog, like you were describing. It was for something else.
Well,
But she got the money for it.
Yeah, the seizure dogs, the training on those things is impressive. I recall many years ago somebody doing a presentation about seizure dogs in Toastmasters, and they didn't have the dog lock.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting presentation. Learned a lot on that particular day.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does it all begin? So let's start there. Because essentially tenants must inform their landlords of the need for an accommodation, because hey, let's face it, I've just lost the use of my legs beneath my knee, and how's Angela going to know, other than me waving at her saying, hey Angela, my landlord,
look at me.
Yeah, look at me, as if you had even got your eyes open that day when I'm walking past your house, right?
Mm-hmm.
That clearly there's a need to tell the landlord, and
and this is one of the problems that a lot of people have. Like I have tenants who write things in and said, oh, the landlord should know I'm disabled and I have to be accommodated. I don't even know their disability. I know she's on ODSP, but as I said, people can be on ODSP for all sorts of things. Nor has my client has ever advised a landlord or myself or anybody else as to why, first of all, why they're on ODSP or what their disability is that they need accommodation for, and specifically what kind of accommodation.
And essentially what we're looking at is all requests must be made in writing with adequate details that might and that if you've got a medical condition, that likely is going to include medical reports, doctor reports, physiotherapy reports that tell the landlord the types of changes that will need to be made to the rental unit.
And it doesn't have to show one's diagnosis. You don't have to say, oh, this person has such and such a diagnosis and here's the whole medical chart. No. What they need is a report from a doctor saying this person has a diagnosis, and it's a progressive diagnosis, where they will be requiring the use of a service animal, or where they will be requiring where they cannot use stairs, or they may require a light on that'll light up because the person has deafened and they can no longer hear, so they need a light if there's a fire alarm out. So there's a lot of different types of accommodations that they would be requesting.
The question about that's actually a very important point, actually, because we all take the fire alarm to be for granted, and in fact, in reality, if you're deaf, suddenly you're living, if you're deaf, you could be living a normal life where you go to work, you drive your car, you do a lot of things. But if you're in a building that catches fire, how would you know?
Yeah, how would you know? And this is where it's considered a safety thing, you know. And people who are deaf, they have these lighting things, and there's also vibration, and they can have them changed, put on your phones too,
Yeah, and
so you can
the
see them
other thing,
and vibrate on it. So it's very interesting. There's so much stuff nowadays that
yeah,
may have not have been there 20 years ago.
yeah. Well, the interesting thing is about that is, of course, that yes, your phone can be so much more than a phone these days. I was talking to somebody the other day. He said, "My phone's my lifetime, but I never make any calls on it."
Yeah, exactly. Like everybody does everything on their phones except make phone calls.
Yeah. And it's like, you want me to take a phone call at the office? Really?
Yeah, although I do take phone calls on my phone, but mostly from family.
Yeah.
And also from people like Peter and Justin and others.
No, okay, so the point being is that requests must be made in writing with adequate details to allow the landlord to know what changes must be made.
Yep.
And that's the point. It's the point is that, Mr. Landlord, I'm now in a wheelchair, and now all doors that I'm going to need to get into and out of my apartment, and including all the doors within my apartment, need to be, I think it's 36 inches wide.
Yep. Need to be wider. And
Yeah.
I need to be able to get into my bathroom. I can no longer do so because
Yeah.
my wheelchair won't let me get in.
Yeah. And obviously you're dealing with a request like that, and some of those requests can be quite complicated, aren't they?
Yeah. And then there's also things too, like mental health disabilities.
Okay.
Okay. Like if somebody, say, if they're living in a building where the person has issues where they cannot stand a lot of noise, and there's a bar next to the building where there's a lot of noise late at night, that maybe there's another quieter side of the building person could be moved to. Okay, so there's a lot of different things to consider when you're looking at accommodations.
That's a very important point to consider, because as you pointed out, that's a kind of, you don't think of that as a disability, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Especially
Mental health can be a very severe disability.
Especially it's a disability that's late onset, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You might only develop it late in life. You were the party animal in your 20s and 30s, and now you can't stand noise.
Yep. Yep. Like you were talking before about a person became brain injured. He used to love music and suddenly becomes brain injured and he hates music.
Yeah. Exactly. My friend was like that. He sadly died. But he went from rock and roll's greatest fan to he couldn't stand anything that goes with a twang.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how a lot of these things affect people. Disabilities can have a huge impact on people and has to be taken into consideration. So if you're a tenant, it's not good enough to just say, well, I'm on disability. They're supposed to know I'm disabled.
Yeah.
They're not going to absorb all your needs by osmosis. Even if they know you're on disability, even if they collect your rent from disability, they're not going to absorb what your reason is. They can't just call ODSP and say, what's this person's disability? You know what? ODSP doesn't even know.
Yeah.
Because when they get approved, all the information is in another office.
Well, exactly. And the thing is, in order to get onto ODSP, again, you need things like medical reports. We talked about that last week.
Mm-hmm.
So you need medical reports. You need sort of reports that would help the person deciding on your right to benefits as to whether you have a right to benefits.
Yep.
And the point being is that how ODSP will look at your benefits and your rights to benefits is different than what accommodation you might need from your landlord.
Yep, exactly. And they're very different. Right?
Yeah.
Many people on ODSP can get along just fine as long as their rent is at a reasonable price.
And one of the things we talked about last week on the ODSP question is that you could still live in your house, even if it let's say instead of it taking you to get up in the morning, instead of it taking you 10 minutes to shower and get dressed and get downstairs and have your breakfast, maybe a normal person it takes 20 minutes. Maybe this particular person can do it, but they might take 45, 50, 60 minutes doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the pace that they go at.
Yep.
But again, that still might be enough for it may be enough for them to get ODSP, but it might not need an accommodation from the landlord.
Yeah, because you get along just fine with what you have in there in your house, and you can get in and out of your house, okay? Get into your bathroom and use whatever amenities you have in your home. But the thing is, these are issues that have that, and also too sometimes treatment by people. And this also involves treatment by people. So if the landlord, for example, knows that you're, say, with Canadian Mental Health and they placed you there, and Canadian Mental Health helps subsidize your rent, and then your landlord starts picking on you and say, well, you're just nutso, you don't know what you're doing, you're just flipping out on me over everything, it's starting to make fun of you for your mental health problems. That's a form of discrimination too.
Mm-hmm.
They have no right to do that.
Yeah.
Okay? They have to treat you just like any other tenant. And also, if you're on ODSP and you're in a building with several people who are not on ODSP, your landlord has no right to demand that they'll only rent to you if you pay direct in your rent. When other people who work somewhere are not asked to have their employers pay them direct.
Yeah.
So
So
you have to treat everybody the same.
Yeah. Landlords must treat or seriously consider all accommodation requests. So that's why we wanted you to put it in writing. That's why we wanted you to make it clear to the landlord what you need.
Yeah, and this is what I need. I need a unit on the bottom floor. I can't deal with the stairs anymore.
Yeah.
Is there some way I can take over that empty unit?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different discussion that goes on about this, and landlord has to take it seriously.
And the point being is that that's an important factor, because now we're going to come back into the realm of what's undue hardship, because those are all too many. We've seen it in many of the cases that we've handled over time. How many landlords tend to go, well, I don't care. Go find somewhere else to live.
Yeah.
It's
or
not
maybe
for
you
me
belong
to
in
do
a
that.
nursing home or that kind of thing. They get very insulting about these things. Like the context of undue hardship is legally defined. For example, it occurs when the accommodation can cause significant difficulty or expense, and there's no outside funding, and that it applies when accommodation can cause significant or create health and safety risks, or it could be done in such a way where where you have to tear down your house and rebuild it, sort of thing, in order to make the necessary accommodation.
Mm. Okay. So what I was talking about earlier on about putting a lift in might be a practical solution if it's achievable within the scope of that if it was an accommodation that was required.
Yeah, like some of them you may have like a closet, say, on the first floor, and then it goes up to the second floor with another closet. A lift will be possible. Right? But these things have to be explored by somebody who could estimate that and then do that. And there's funding actually available. Okay? It doesn't pay for all of it, but it helps cover the cost quite a bit for people who need to make their homes accessible, or even landlords who are trying to accommodate people with disabilities.
Okay, and that's always important to know, because obviously I think from the experience we have, it's typically the smaller landlords that have got small 1 and 2 homes that will do more to accommodate their tenants with issues than the larger ones, who seem to kind of go, well, it's not my responsibility, go elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing here, what's not considered undue hardship, is worried about what other tenants will think.
Yeah.
Okay? who cares what other tenants will think? You're accommodating that person.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's a mere inconvenience to do this. It has to be beyond that. As I said, it's cost, outside sources of funding, and health and safety. There's plenty of case law that will tell you whether this reaches that tipping point.
Okay.
And so far yet, when I've taken anything to the Human Rights Tribunal, has ever any decision been made against a client of mine, either in mediation or in actual hearing, was undue hardship ever a factor in the decision?
Yeah, but of course, if if for example your house is worth 150,000 and it requires $100,000 worth of changes to it, and the value is not going to go up at all,
Mm-hmm.
then
Yep.
that
That
would
might be
probably be
considered,
considered
and you
undue
can put
hardship.
that forward as an argument.
Yeah.
Okay, because we've looked at that, and that's been a case. Okay, we're in fact putting these kinds of accommodations in an average house, but actually might even increase the value, particularly those people who want to move in your house and age in place.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that it's always weighing those factors when something gets brought to the Human Rights Tribunal,
Yeah. Yeah.
where we look at it. And landlords have a responsibility to look and see to source these things out, to see if they can get some funding, to see if they might be able to authorize it with additional loan or a mortgage, or see if it could be done through something like there is money for accessibility that people can apply for, and also see whether this would be doable in their home.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
many times I've seen so many designs. I've walked around even in my neighborhood where I've seen people make these kinds of adjustments in homes.
Yeah. And actually, we were talking about the Ontario,
Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act.
Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and I think we were talking about it actually in another context in terms of commercial property a few
Mhm.
months ago, and we were talking about how the fact that that's one of the exceptions to that act, or has been. But
Mhm.
again, that's supposed to be brought up to code. But in fact, actually, there's plenty of places that where there's almost never going to be access to second, third, or fourth, or higher floors in
Like
older
these
buildings.
heritage properties, for
Yeah,
example.
yeah, exactly. Like heritage properties,
Mhm.
because installing a lift of whatever kind is an impossibility.
Yeah,
That the only
this is
place you
what
can
needs to be
install the
considered.
lift.
Like we've talked about commercial properties, for example, if you're in any kind of practice that serves people, make sure you're fully accessible.
Yeah.
If you're not fully accessible, forget it.
I was going to say one of the things we talked about was putting a lift in, and maybe the only place accessible to get a lift in would be in the street outside, which
Yeah,
makes it an
exactly. Yeah,
impossibility.
sometimes they can get around the whole house, everything,
Yeah,
but or the whole property they can get around in a wheelchair, but
or at least on the
getting
one
up,
floor.
getting up there is going to
Yeah,
be a challenge.
yeah,
So there's a lot of things that people have to look at. So like as a practitioner, I've moved offices many times, but in every office I was in, it was always fully accessible. I always insisted on full accessibility because of the people we serve.
yeah,
I want anybody to be able to come into this office, to be able to sit in their library, to be able to meet with people in their offices, be able to use our washroom, that sort of thing, so that they could access that like anybody. So this is what's important to me. It's not something that people could always do something about,
yeah.
but it is something that I recommend as part of a professional standard.
But again, we are talking today in relation to residential tenancies rather
Yeah,
than
not
commercial.
commercial. Yeah, residential
Commercial law.
tenancies. This is
Yeah,
landlords. I'm going to design a triplex. Let's see how we're going to design a triplex. Maybe there could be a disability unit on the main floor. The other 2 floors, maybe not.
Yeah.
But these things, try to put an effort into these things, if you can, if your building is something that something could be done with. Okay. And I
Okay.
completely understand that some of these buildings here are like 100 years old.
Okay, so here's a question that somebody who's a tenant with a disability might well be thinking. Can I install a physical modification without the landlord's approval? Because I've got a little bit of money. I got an inheritance from my aunt. Maybe I can put in the stair lift myself.
Something that if you can remove it and take it with you, okay? But you do have to inform your landlord that this is what you're trying to do, because maybe there's a reason you can't, okay?
Mhm.
And the landlord have to review that with you and why you need the stair lift or why
Mhm.
you need the grab bars in the bathtub, okay? Why you need to switch the lighting out so there's just no more high glare on things. So, there's a lot of different things that you'd have to discuss with your landlord why you're doing that. The reason being is if you're doing something, the landlord's got building insurance. Okay, they don't want you just to go and get your friend Joe, who happens to have done some carpentry work to his own house, to come over to do that job for your landlord's house and then cause some problems with his insurance.
Right, and it's the same as you going and changing the washer in the leaky tap in the kitchen. You
Yep,
may have the skills to do it, but you're not insured.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just tell the landlord this is what you need to do. And is it okay if I do it? And sometimes tenants have those skills. Sometimes the landlord will say, okay, you're a tenant and you worked as a contractor, so why not? Because
Mm.
sometimes people have that and the landlord lets them do it. It saves them a bit of money, okay? So they can do that sort of thing. And they may take a bit off their rent or something, to help cover some of the costs. But this is something you have to talk about. That conversation has to take place. Hey, just don't do it and then have them come down and say, what's this? What's this all about? You're redecorating my house.
Yeah,
Yeah, can't.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so so that's an important point to note, and that goes back to the early point that we were talking about: work with your landlord, and in order to get it done, work.
And chances are they'll be
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And again, okay, so can both parties should cooperate to find reasonable solutions, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of
And
where we
this
can
is
push.
and this is common in the Human Rights Code. There's a case called Honda versus Case, where you're dealing, this is an employment context. Okay. Is there somebody here?
Yeah,
Yeah, employment. There's a Honda versus case, which indicates that the person who is seeking the accommodations must participate in helping the accommodations happen. Okay, as does the other party that has to provide the accommodations. So in other words, you need to do some legwork, you need to do some research, and you need to work with the person who does it. Sometimes at the workplace, for example, you need to see someone that can evaluate you properly. Like say if you need an ergonomic assessment
yeah.
or if you need any kind of assessments to so that they can properly place you at a special desk or whatever. So these are things that people have to participate in. It's the same as in a landlord tenant situation.
Yeah. Okay. One thing that's important to note is harassment due to disability is prohibited, as are reprisals because of any request that's made to a landlord.
Absolutely. That means calling people names. That means treating them differently because they have a disability. Means even policies put in place because someone has a disability. Like I've seen landlords, they have 100 units and they say all ODSP people must pay to rent or else they're not renting here.
Yeah.
Can't do that. Can't
Mm.
do that. Especially if the other people on the other floors who are working at McDonald's even, hey, are not being asked to have their employer pay them direct.
Yeah.
I mean, this is discrimination. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people on a disability volunteer that. That's fine. You could do that. But
Yeah.
don't tell the person that that's conditional upon allowing them to live there.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, tenants can bring a claim to the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario if any of their rights are breached.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, don't forget that they can also do it to the LTB as well.
Yep, the Landlord Tenant Board can also hear these types of cases, particularly when there's harassment involved and the landlord
Well,
refuses to accommodate you and harasses you because you asked, or starts issuing end notices to you because you started asking.
yeah. And exactly that. So, not only is the LTB able to make a decision based upon harassment for things like because a tenant's gay or other things of that nature, they can also deal with the claim based upon the tenant's disability.
Yep, exactly. It's the same rights that they look after under the Human Rights Code. The Landlord Tenant Board can also look after that too.
So, and a lot of it is, whereas, which path you pick, whether it's Human Rights Code or the LTB, will depend upon what kind of
What kind of factors are playing in? What are you feeling
yeah,
the most? Where are the pressure points? This
yeah.
is how I decide which function to use.
But the other question might well be what remedies are available.
Yeah, what remedies are available, what you're trying to do,
Yeah.
what you like to see happen, like with the lady with the push button thing to get into the building. That was very appropriately put through the Human Rights Code, even though she tried to do this through Landlord Tenant Board, but for some reason I don't know what happened with the board.
Yeah.
But we put it through the Human Rights Code, and it went through, and we got a solution for her.
Yeah. All right. So I think if you've got an issue, I would still be saying if you've got any issues about disability, take some legal advice. It's probably best to spend a half hour consultation with somebody in the legal profession to say, hey, what are my rights? Understand what your rights are. Even if all you do is now you go off and you write to your landlord a 4-page monologue about what you need changing within your rental unit.
Yep.
And that may be sufficient. It may be all that you need to get the changes you need done. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes people may not understand something.
Yeah.
Hey, but when you put it in writing to them, it may be clear to them.
Yeah.
But sometimes they'll say, "You SOB, you can't do that."
Yeah.
What do you think I am, made of money? But basically, the thing is, that's when you start getting legal representation and say, "Hey, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's going to turn out bad if you keep this up."
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we do a lot of human rights cases. Mostly involving human disability, but we've also done human rights cases on just about every other common ground that people get discriminated on.
Okay, so if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so at 905-688-5598, or you can email Angela at weareinvictus.legal, or myself at peter@weareinvictus.legal, or our website is weareinvictus.legal. Okay, and there you go for Angela.
Yep. And Joe, what you heard today at Spin Legal, whether this show or others in the series, this is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, then please contact a paralegal or lawyer. Be great if you contact us, but we really appreciate it. But however, do contact a paralegal or lawyer, and they'd be giving you very specific advice adhering to your own specific situation. Because I said every case is different.
Yeah.
So this is why it's important to get legal advice. Don't go to Facebook or Google it or whatever, because it's not necessarily going to be the right solution for you.
Yep. All right. And we'll be back here next Tuesday at 6 o'clock-ish.
Yep.
Right? So have a great week, everybody, and stay legal.
Stay legal.